I mean, you've done so much. You're an author, a filmmaker, an award-winning filmmaker, I should say. You've spoken at a TED event, but I would love to start here, and I'm going to pull this from your website. As a child, I was almost eaten by a lion. As a teenager, I took games off a future Wimbledon champion. And in Oxford, I gave a TED talk on finding several blue lobsters in 48 hours. So maybe we start first. When were you almost eaten as a lion?
When I was young, like 4, 5, 6 years old, I lived in Africa. Father was an architect. So I was playing out in the lawn.
Okay.
A little me, curly hair, blonde. And then all of a sudden, kind of out in the bush, a lion appeared. And we think of lions like Simba, like the Lion King, right? It's this gentle soul that will take care of you. That was not the case.
Oh, man. Yeah.
So my parents were actually watching this unfold, and it starts to move towards me. And you can imagine, like, my parents are just absolutely terrified. My father did stand up to kind of like try to distract him or something. But then the lion started to go towards me, and at like the last second veered off. And there was like a pen of animals nearby. And there's a little bit of disagreement on what animal the lion took instead of me.
But it went for the animals.
I went for the animals. But at the last second, I mean, the most common version of this story is that it went for like a pig instead of me. So it went for like prosciutto.
Yeah, right.
Instead of me. And I include that story in bios and things like that because like it just always reminds me of life is fragile. Life is a gift. I mean, there's that fun statistic. It's like we're a 1 in 400 trillion miracle. Like if you take all the generations, all involved, that you're there and I'm here, like the odds are 1 in 400 trillion that you exist.
That's like almost unfathomably large to even be here.
Fathomably large, right? And so if you think about it, right, that moment could have gone a couple of different ways. And so I carry that story with me as a reminder, like your life means something, right? You don't waste it. Like this is your opportunity to make the most of what happened. And I think we all have those sort of stories where like if it gone one way or the other, a car accident.
I have exactly right.
Right?
Terrible car accident. Well, I wasn't in one. I should have been in one. I was working at a summer internship, extremely late nights, driving like hours back and forth every day. On my way into work one day, I fell asleep at the wheel and I woke up. Truly must have missed the barrier by an inch. I mean, it felt like I was in the barrier, moving through it, phasing through it. That's how close I was.
Right.
And that's a story where I'm like, if I had slept for 10 milliseconds more, I probably would not be here right now. It speaks to the fragility of life.
Right. It comes down to that, right? And so you can either say, oh, I'm so lucky and brush that story off, or you could be like, well, I'm going to take that story and make the most of it. Like I have a chance.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can do something with my life. So I've carried that story with me, and it just reminds me life's a gift. It's fragile. Make the most of it, right?
Absolutely.
The lion went for prosciutto and not me.
To you. And I want to spend a little more time on this, on the miracle point.
Yeah.
Right before we get there, though, I am curious, who did you take games off of? Who was the future Wimbledon champion?
So I was 16. I was playing tennis in Europe. Fortunate to do that. Played Boris Becker the year before he won Wimbledon. So he's 15, 16 years old. And I think of that story because it reminds me, like there's a difference between good and great. And so I remember that moment because, he's acing me, right? And it reminded me that there's always this other level. There's always something you can get better at. And it was one of those moments where, being humbled, you kind of saw like, oh, there's a journey ahead to mastering something.
Yeah.
That's what great looks like. I was fortunate to take a few games off of him, but I mean, the
gap is
the
large.
gap was large, and so it always reminds me there's a difference between good and great.
Yeah.
And it's really what you want to aspire to do and to be.
It's funny. I would almost pose a question back on you quickly.
Yeah.
Is sometimes I feel that way too. Like,
Yeah.
I'm good at this, but I could be better. I think
Yeah.
sometimes I actually use that against myself. Like,
Interesting.
And so that's one thing I'm overcoming right now is like, okay, how can I appreciate that I am good at this thing while still understanding that I can be a whole lot better, but not in a negative way, like being,
Totally.
proud of where I've come
Yeah.
and understanding with respect that there's more to go.
And those are choices.
Yeah.
I think you put it so well. It's important to balance ambition and gratitude. And there's an equation there, right? And so you need to keep your ambition in check with gratitude. Like, look how far I am. Look at this amazing podcast you're doing and the impact you're making. But if that gets out of balance and I'm just in ambition and I miss the gratitude, the experience loses something.
You rob yourself of something.
You rob yourself. Gratitude balances ambition, and those two, when they're in balance, I think produce a meaningful and a happy life.
Well, the last story that you have here is you had either caught or come across several blue lobsters in a 2-day period. I myself, so I sometimes go on these rabbit holes on social media.
Yeah.
One of them is, I forget the TikTok account, but there's a guy who's like he's a lobster fisherman out in Cape Cod.
Right.
And he'll pull up his, lobster pot every day, and like one in every 100 days, he'll get one blue lobster. And I mean, he's doing this for a living. He's fishing millions of lobsters at a time. You saw multiple in just a couple-day period. And I think this speaks to a broader theme about maybe the existence of miracles or how significant they are. Could you tell that quick story? And then maybe we can talk, a little bit more about your view on miracles.
Yeah. So we were in Nantucket, and there's a small little aquarium in Nantucket. And so I'm with my kids. My oldest son is 12. And we're looking in kind of this pool. And so in the pool is a blue lobster. And like the young woman who's explaining this stuff says, like, the statistics are it's basically like 1 out of every 2 to 3 million lobsters are blue. You're fortunate to come across one in your lifetime.
And they're beautiful. To
They're
anybody
beautiful.
listening, if you've never seen one, they're stunning.
They're beautiful, right? And so I say to my son, Brendan, I say, the next time you're going to see a blue lobster is hundreds and thousands of days from today. Like, the odds are you're never going to see this. I'm trying to make a big impression on him, right?
Look how special this is.
Look how special. And he was a little ambivalent. He was like, yeah, that's cool, Dad, right? But then the next day, we're in Provincetown, right on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And we are exploring the docks there. And we're looking for, like, slipper shells and horseshoe crabs and kind of the experience of Cape Cod at that time. And so out on this dock, there's a post.
Okay.
And it's weathered and beaten up. And on this post are 2 perfectly cleaned blue lobsters there.
Next to each other.
Next to each other.
That gave me
Clean.
chills. That's one of the most unbelievable things I've ever heard in my life.
And so what does that mean, right? So
And how did they get there? And together.
and perfectly cleaned.
That's might be the craziest part, is when have you ever seen a lobster clean ever?
Someone or something. Or how do you even interpret that?
Seriously.
Right? So for us in our family, what happened, we have a picture of our son holding both of them. And it's been a central metaphor for us because, how do you look at life? Is life give you these glimpses of the unseen? In one version of that story, it's this person who somehow caught 2 blue lobsters, somehow decided to clean them,
Yeah.
and somehow decided to put them on a post
To leave them. Yeah.
to leave them. Or is there some other strange, wonderful, mystical thing going on? Albert Einstein supposedly said there's 2 ways to go through life. One is to view everything as a miracle or to view nothing as a miracle. The funny thing, he actually didn't say that. What he actually said, which is equally interesting, he said the most beautiful and profound experience that we can have is the mystical. He said, if we don't open ourselves to that emotion, if we don't open ourselves to wonder, if we don't enable ourselves to be, he called it, wrapped in awe, he said, we're as good as dead.
Really?
At least for our family and my own life. Like, that story, it's so strange, beautiful, inexplicable. It reminds our family and myself these wonderful things can happen. And I think other people have those experiences. And it's important for all of us to kind of think through, well, what's been my blue lobster?
Absolutely.
Right? I think everyone has one. Like, this thing that doesn't quite make sense. Right? That's something where 1 + 1 = 3. Or you happen to be at this certain party at this certain moment. You weren't supposed to be there. And there's the love of your life.
Yeah.
You meet someone in a coffee shop. You're trying to create something in your life, and that person helps you. I think that's what Einstein was getting at. And that's what the blue lobsters to us mean. Like, there's something in life that is trying to help.
It's funny, as I really think about it, and I'm not just saying this, I almost feel like I feel that way every day.
Interesting. Yeah.
And some days it feels like everything's going wrong. And maybe in reality, everything is going wrong. But I feel like there are too many times to count almost on a daily basis where something happens and I think to myself, that was unexpectedly good, or that's going to lead to something that I wasn't thinking about.
Nice.
That's, and I don't realize this in real time. But like when I get moments like this and I have the privilege to reflect, I do think they happen to us more than we actually realize.
Absolutely.
I really do. And maybe the power is in recognizing them.
So I've taken that, and after my father died, which was really a difficult time in my life, I tried exactly what you're talking about. So what I decided to do was to trust there was something good in every day. There was, so Joan Didion's this author, really great essayist, wrote A Year of Magical Thinking, and she calls it a shimmer. So she says in every day there's a shimmer. There's something that sparkles. There's something magical. There's something, call it a miracle. And so I did what you're talking about, Mike. I decided to go every day and look for something. And I wanted to sort of test it. So what I did was I started a daily blog. And so every day, and we're now over 500 days into it.
And congratulations.
Thank you. I mean, it's like working out every day.
Doing something every day is hard.
And it's been a journey, because what it does, exactly what you're saying, do you trust that the day offers you something? And it goes back to that Einstein quote, like, is life a miracle or it's not? You can be kind of dead to the mystical, but then you're dead to wonder and to awe. Or you can be like, I'm going to trust there's something in this day that is beautiful.
Yeah.
There's something wondrous. And so I've been writing it every day. Well, I kind of call it like a miracle mindset now. There's an author, Carol Dweck, who talks about like different mindsets. So you can like a growth mindset, like I'm going to try to grow in my life. But I kind of call it like a miracle mindset. So I'm going to start this day expecting something. And it could be as small as a bird singing in a tree, something I read, a conversation, but it connects me to the miracle of life.
It sounds to some people, and even to me, it almost sounds like a little foofy and out there and like, is this really going to work? Candidly, a lot of days I'm lost. Like the whimsy is lost on me. The mystical is lost on me. But I actually read most of your book, and it's wonderful.
I'm honored.
And the reflections you have in there are very profound and speak to like a very real change you can make in your daily life if you start to just look around.
Yeah.
And your point about saying, what is this day going to offer me? I think is a really important one, because a lot of times I wake up and I have the inverse mindset. It's like, how am I going to get through this day?
Oh, yeah.
How am I going to possibly do this one more time? I'm still going to experience the same things, but I can probably choose to frame things in a way that's different than maybe I'm doing right now.
And it's interesting what word you use to go into that day. Like, and I understand it, right? How am I going to get through?
Yeah.
Right? That's a mindset. And it's kind of like, it makes you think about like persistence and resilience, and all those things are so necessary to living our life. But there's another set of words, another set of vocabulary. That vocabulary includes like the word trust. Can I trust that this day will provide something to me?
Yeah.
And I'm 500 days into it, and I can say, like, I went on that journey and I've learned to trust that day will provide something. And so that choice between trust and get through, and we've all been in both places, that goes back to the Einstein thing. If you open yourself to the mystical, you won't have any more beautiful and profound experience. And that's that little micro decision you make to try that journey.
I think with anything in life, there's so much trust that we don't talk about. Trust in others. But for me especially, I think it's trust in the universe or in God or whatever you want to call it. Like, I often relate it back to just this podcast, not because this is like everything in my life, but because it's so relevant for me right now. And to anybody listening, it's the lens they view me through. So like for me, I don't think I give myself enough credit for trusting so deeply that this is gonna continue to grow. Like, why else would I be doing this if I didn't trust and believe that this would be something real, even more real than it is right now?
Right.
And the reason I'm doing anything is because I trust that if I do it, good things will happen.
Here's the thing. Like every day I had to wake up and make that decision. And every night or early in the morning, I had to make the decision to write that down. So one of the things, trust doesn't get you off the hook.
Completely.
Right? And that's a little like you're talking like the woo-woo stuff about it or however. It's not like, oh, I'm going to trust and now the universe is going to bring me magical things, right? I don't know if it works like that. I think what trust does, it sort of orients you in the right direction. It puts you in the right place at the right time. And it doesn't excuse you from the hard work.
My favorite type of people are the people that pray for things and then go get them, or like,
Yeah.
and say, see me, recognize me.
Yes.
But you don't have to guide me, or you don't have to push me there. I'll go there. I just want you to see my heart.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful prayer. Right. Could there be no more profound prayer than put me in the place where I'm supposed to be?
Right.
Because if I'm in the place where I'm supposed to be, then I'm gonna be who I am, right? And then who I am can emerge.
100%.
Right. And I do, well, this is interesting. I do think if that's your prayer, then intuition can play a role. So intuition means like I should maybe, if I'm in a bookstore, pick that book up.
The one that's talking to me.
What is that? I don't even know. Right. But that has, I'm getting goosebumps. That has happened to me. I should turn left. I should turn right. I should, and that's where, whether you call it the spirit, the universe, whatever, back to the Einstein thing, either there's something happening here, the mystical, or there's not. And the intuition part, I think, means that you're opening yourself to being in the right place at the right time.
Exactly. And you're willing to continue to work in the world in such a way that you will open doors to the right places.
I think so.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's not perfect. And every now and again, the universe, God, whatever language feels comfortable to you, I do think sometimes it's not supposed to be easy.
And in fact, I think it's very hard.
Yeah.
There's
a in scripture, there's a phrase that says that endurance produces character and character produces hope. And there's a through line there. So the more you stick with it, it's not supposed to be easy, right? But if you stay with it, like your podcast, which is incredible, that changes your character.
It does.
Right? You're different. And then that creates hope. And hope creates opportunity. Hope gets you up in the morning. But those three things are aligned, right? The more you stick with it, that's the endurance part. That connects with your character, and now you're a different person, and now you're more hopeful. But if you give up in the endurance part, maybe your character is different.
Yeah.
And maybe you're less hopeful. So somehow those three things are connected, I think.
Again, so unbelievably well said. And again, I'll relate it to me. And I'm still in the endurance phase of this.
Right.
But it's so interesting how, back 7 months ago when I started this thing, it was so hard and there was not that much hope. There was a lot of doubt.
Yes.
And I just kept telling myself, like, for the first time ever, I need to continue to do this because this is the thing I'm supposed to do. No matter how I feel, I'm going to keep going. And it's almost like a flywheel. Like, the more you do it, the more episodes I do and the more conversations I have like this, the better I feel. And therefore, it makes me feel like there are good things on the other side if I keep doing this. The harder I work, the more hopeful I feel. Let's put it that way.
Endurance.
Yeah, completely.
Leads to character.
Leads to hope.
Leads to hope. And I would say, I think I feel the character in you.
Thank you.
Like, just to affirm that, like, those three things are aligned in the work that you're doing and the people you have on your podcast. And like I saw, like, in 2025, aren't you like one of the top 8 podcasts to listen to?
I was recommended by MSN in an article about, like, these are people you should pay attention to.
Right. So, I mean, there it is, right?
Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you. And this is a broader thing, but I don't think I give myself credit ever. I think this is a challenge a lot of people face. And, I could do a better job at that. And to anybody listening, I think, a lot of my viewers, I think, are striving as well. And maybe don't give themselves the acknowledgement they deserve.
Well, that's that balance between gratitude and ambition, right?
Completely.
Right. So it's being grateful for this particular moment in time, this conversation. One phrase, I was going through a difficult time a few months ago and difficult week. And this phrase came to me, that there's no repeatable days. I can't repeat this day.
Yeah.
I can't repeat this moment. It's a beautiful thing. It goes to that Einstein mystical idea. So although, like, you and I both want this conversation to go well, right?
I know where you're going with this.
But I need to balance that with the gratitude.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to, on this specific section, I want to close with a passage from your book.
Yeah.
It's titled The Story Knows When It's Time. And you write, I was talking with someone about how we evolve and grow in our lives, and she made the fascinating observation, you have to be ready for your next story. What she was reflecting on is how everyone moves through a sequence of stories in their lives with relationships, careers, aspirations, dreams. But there are some new stories we can't rush. They begin in our lives when we're truly ready. And somehow, and this is the mystery and we need to trust, the story knows when it's time. And I think this speaks to everything we've been discussing, especially so with, daily miracles and the universe moving in a way that it needs to move on your behalf.
Right.
I think as long as you trust and believe that you will be exactly where you need to be, that's a very hopeful mindset. Very hopeful mindset.
I agree, and I think it's a couple things. It's and sort of what we're talking about. You brought up the idea of prayer. When you prayerfully say, "Help me," and I don't know who that prayer is going to, God, the universe, even to yourself, to be in the right place in the right time, to put my heart and my mind and my body in alignment, then you're growing. And so when that opportunity, that story appears, perhaps you're more likely to recognize it.
Yes.
Maybe you're more likely to receive it. And it's really living your life open to that possibility. Emily Dickinson, this poet, said in a lovely phrase, I dwell in possibility. I think that when you're open to that next story coming into your life, you're dwelling in that possibility. And sometimes those stories are big changes.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes they're small changes. But it goes to this idea, I think that's really important, that when you look at the universe, when you look at our world, when you look at nature and life, it is always growing and evolving. Nothing is static. Nothing is staying the way it is. So that next story it is always evolving. It's always right there. And part of the journey in life is to be ready when that story appears in front of you. And there's always another story.
And I like framing it as a story too,
Yeah.
right? I think it helps a little bit. Like sometimes when things feel really hard for me, like I'm
Yes.
overwhelmed, I can't do this. It's like,
Understand.
this is all part of the story.
Yes.
One of many stories.
One of many stories.
And that is the arc of my life. I think sometimes even if I'm losing the plot in certain stories, I'm still progressing through that arc.
And there's different ways to think of that story, which is really profound what you're just saying. Like, we all lose the plot because we're inside the story.
That's so true. You can't read the story when you're part of the story.
Right? You can write it. I mean, there's people talk about that, like you're the author of your own life. Like there's an element to it that you have some input in the story, but you're inside the story. And in any good story, we lose our way for a little while, and we discover things. And when we're lost, we discover something new. So inside the story is where we are.
So beautiful, man. It's so, and it's also so true. And it's one of those things that before I started to try and embrace like personal growth and I sort of refound my spirituality, like I would have heard what you just said and said, that's ridiculous. That's crazy. But it's actually really not.
Yeah.
And as somebody who's now trying to do these things for myself, like it's actually quite useful and helpful.
I think so.
And my view on it is, look, you've got two ways to view the world. You can either view it through that lens, or you can be more cynical and, maybe a little more pessimistic, or not view it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
I choose, the first one every time. At least now I do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, so we're talking about stories, and you are an author. You've written several books.
Yeah.
One of them we've spoken briefly about, but another one that I'm really interested to talk to you about is called Middle of the Maze, 5 Secrets to Finding Your Way.
Yeah.
I'm very curious. What is the maze?
Well, that's a great question. So one of the things I enjoy doing is finding the right metaphor, the right image to kind of help make sense of life. And that works for me as a creative person. I'm not so good with finances. I'm not like so good in that world. So numbers don't make sense to me that well, but images, metaphor, creativity does. And historically, there's 2 ways to think of a journey. One is this idea of a labyrinth. So a labyrinth, if you've ever seen one, it's one circular path and it kind of takes you to the center. It's a meditative journey, but you just keep walking and you're going to get to the center.
So there's
That's
no
a
different
labyrinth.
paths. There's only one path.
One path.
Okay.
A maze is different. A maze they're little cul-de-sacs. There's a little dead end. You got to turn around. You can get lost for a second, but there is a center of the maze. And that image has made sense to me as life, that when we go through life, we're inside this maze. We know we want to head somewhere. There's a center, but we're going to hit a dead end, or we're going to have to turn around. We might get frustrated in the maze. We might even want to give up
You might
in the
feel
maze
very lost as well.
and feel lost in a maze, right? To me, that has made sense as I've known and worked and talked with people that they say, that's my life. Like, I wish it was a labyrinth. I wish it was one circle that just led right there, but it's not one path. But in the maze, I'm gonna get lost, and I got to keep going.
What's at the middle of it?
To me, in my work and in my life, I think we're on a journey to discover who we are.
Me too.
And I think in the center of the maze, we become our true self, that we find it's an alignment. It's an alignment of our mind, our thoughts. It's an alignment of our heart and spirit. It's an alignment of our body.
Yeah.
And when we're on that journey, when we find that center of the maze, that's where we truly find meaning and purpose in who we are. I think we go through different mazes in different times in our life.
I was going to ask you, is it one maze or it's many mazes?
I think it's many mazes, but for some people it might be one long maze. I don't know. Like in different times in my life when I've gone into a new challenge or a new calling or something, like going into filmmaking or songwriting or being a pastor, for example, each one of those has been a maze. And I think as I progressed within the story, within the journey, I discovered who I was in that journey. And that's a good day, right?
It's an amazing, it's a win for the home team.
It's a win for the home team.
Let me ask you this, because I'm in the process, I am finding my way through the maze, and I'm losing myself and finding myself every single day. It's been a particularly interesting year for me, and it's exciting.
Okay.
It's also very scary.
Yeah.
But I think my 27th and 28th year of life, I will look back on and be like, this is the one that changed a lot.
Yes.
But I always find myself asking, like, am I the person who I'm supposed to be? Like, how will I know if I'm in the center of the maze? Like, it's this question I'm always asking myself, like, is this how I'm supposed to feel? Is what I'm saying aligned with what I believe? How do I know that I am who I say I am?
I think emotion is a part of it.
Yeah.
In that center, I think whether it's a sense of joy, whether it's a sense of peace, whether it's a sense of contentment. But it goes back to that Einstein idea. If we don't open ourselves to the mystical, if we are dead to wonder and to awe, we're going to miss it. Right? So when we're there, we're not ready for it. So I do think part of the maze opens you up to that experience. And we find that in all mystical writings, from Judaism to Buddhism to Christianity. All these wisdom teachers describe this moment where you are at ease in your own life. But what it means to be human is, for whatever reason, you don't get to hang out there that long.
No, and I certainly don't.
Right? But it gives you a glimpse.
Yeah. I'm always chasing that.
And maybe, the one thought is, I don't know if you can chase it.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. Because I think the harder you try to chase it, the harder it becomes to feel it.
And it's that equation between ambition and gratitude. I also think it's being full. It's a cliche, but it's being fully present in that moment, whatever that means to you. Like people have called it the eternal now. People have called it just being present. But I don't think you can chase the present.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I have tried and continue to try to do this every day. It's like,
yeah,
I ask myself, like, how can I be more present in this moment? How can I focus on, how can you possibly be in the eternal now if you're continually asking yourself how you can step into it? It's not possible.
And wisdom teachers have kind of talked about that. It sounds like we've heard this all before, but it really is paying attention to our breath. It is really trying to feel the moment. Like all of a sudden I'm kind of feeling my hands in a different way than I was a minute ago.
Yeah.
So it is being still as much as we can. And I don't know if even if we're present for a millisecond, victory.
So in today's world, in victory.
Victory?
Massive victory.
1 second, well done. 5 seconds, you are a Jedi master.
Well, on this topic, so, and this is, I guess, goes back to your blog, but, this idea of presence and feeling better,
Yeah.
you've written extensively on,
Right.
maybe how to feel better, right?
Yeah.
To paraphrase.
Right.
I have two questions on that. The
Yeah.
first is, how do you define feeling better? I think for me, it's like, what am I chasing? Like, am I chasing feeling more purposeful? Am I chasing joy? Am I trying to avoid suffering? Like, I guess when you say feel better, like, what is wrapped up in that feeling of better? And then my second question on that is, how do you, you've written so much about it. Teach me? How do I
Right.
feel better, right? What have you learned about that?
I think one is understanding emotions. Because if you think about it, feeling is tied in with our emotions. And we're going to dabble in neuroscience for a little bit here.
Jeez.
And so there's a myth that we can be triggered.
And that's a myth.
It's a myth.
Okay.
Lisa Feldman Barrett, one of the most brightest neuroscientists and psychologists, calls it the most widespread error in science.
Really?
Because how your brain actually works, it's not that I am so being controlled by how you are feeling that makes me feel a certain way. Actually, what's happening in your brain is you are architecting your emotions. What the studies show is you are constructing emotions in your own brain, that you actually have the power to feel better, if you will. So one of the myths is that we are always being triggered,
I'm hand up. I am all the
right?
time. I know I am.
But we have the power in our brain to construct how we want to feel. And so one of the things I learned in this kind of process of how to feel better is we have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
So that can be different tools and different tricks about it. One is to think about we have a well of stories. We have a well of emotions in our history. So what your brain's always doing, it's always predicting what's going to come next.
Absolutely.
Our brain is a prediction machine. And the reason why is it's trying to keep you alive. So it's predicting like there's a threat over there. Pay attention to this over there. It's also predicting how you're going to feel.
I guess I never thought about that.
So for me, sometimes I get anxious going into a social situation, like a group and a party, or maybe I don't know someone.
Me too.
So I'll feel anxious about that. And so I am predicting how I'm going to feel. And so I'm inevitably creating that anxiety before I go into it. I can also kind of before, and it's a little bit like self-talk or self-affirmation, I can say, well, remember you actually went to a party one time and you met someone and it's going to be okay. So let's predict that
Right.
instead.
And you can train yourself over time to start to do this.
100%. And that's what the latest neuroscience shows, that you have a well of memories and stories. So I can predict that this is going to be anxiety producing for me. So I'm pulling that memory into the future.
Okay.
Or I can stop, catch my breath for a couple seconds and say, well, what I'm going to do instead is say, well, remember that time that it went well. Let's predict a good outcome. It goes a little bit to like visualization for athletes. Right. So if I practice in my mind making those free throws, studies show it's as good as actually physically doing it.
There's this amazing clip of, I don't know if you're a soccer fan, Cristiano Ronaldo.
Yeah.
And it's a close-up of his face right before he takes a penalty kick.
Yeah.
And you can see him talking to himself.
Exactly.
And he's saying to himself in Spanish, I've done this before. This is easy for you. Think about all the times this has been successful. You will make the goal.
He's predicting that emotion,
and
right?
he's physically saying it to himself.
Right.
And then he goes and he makes the shot.
That's the neuroscience.
But I think, a lot of people, again, would be like, this is nuts. This is not real. But it actually, look at these people that are doing it. It's as real as it gets. It reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you've read Stoicism. This is like a big thing for men in their 20s. For me as well.
Yeah.
The whole idea, I think, is about reframing your impressions. We are impressed upon millions of times a day, and it's our decision how we feel about those things.
Exactly.
Now, that's easier said than done, I think, especially if you are constantly in high-stress situations.
Right.
But it's real. And if you practice it, it can make a big difference in how you feel.
My wife and I were walking somewhere yesterday, and it was a store, and I think the question was like, what's your daily practice? And it was a wonderful invitation to think through, well, what am I going to practice? Am I going to practice like that soccer player saying, I can do this?
Yeah.
Or am I going to bring up these negative experiences and keep replaying those in my mind? And that's what the latest neuroscience shows, that we can change how we predict. And if we can change how we predict, then we become kind of the architects of our own lives rather than, oh, you know, I can be triggered by your emotion. That puts me in a place where I am always at the whim of someone
Completely.
else, right? But the studies show you have the power to do that.
And it's backed by real neuroscience.
Absolutely. 100%.
I forget who said this. Maybe it was like Earl Nightingale or somebody, but I think that he said the strangest secret is that you become what you think most about. You become
Absolutely.
who your inner voice says you are. Like, you know, and again, I didn't believe that years ago, but now that I'm learning about all these things, like the more I believe that I am the person that I want to become, the more I become that person.
Right.
And the more that I tell myself that this day is a good day, despite it maybe being a bad day, the more likelihood when I get home, I say that was a good day.
Right.
Even though the same things happened to me.
Right.
Whether it was, I previously in the past, I called it a bad day. I get home, I'm like, that wasn't too bad.
Right.
I survived another one.
And that's the power, right? If you realize like your brain is wired to be a prediction machine.
I love that, by the way. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A couple authors, Anil Seth, Andy Clark, Lisa Feldman Barrett. This is kind of the latest way of thinking about emotions and the brain. But when you predict a good outcome, your brain creates that reality. So when you're talking about when what I think about is what I become,
Yeah.
it makes sense, right? If I'm just only going to think about how this can go wrong or I'm going to be anxious,
It's probably going to happen.
I'm predicting it.
Right.
But if I predict, well, today's going to be a good day, today I'm going to see a shimmer, today something good is going to happen to me, I'm wiring my brain, I'm architecting my brain to look through that lens.
Yeah. And I want to say one more thing on this point because I think it's really important.
Yeah.
Part of what's been helpful for me as I build this podcast is the more I talk about this and talk about how I believe in it truly in my heart, the stronger I feel about myself. And it seems like the better things that, continue to happen to me.
Right.
It almost feels like, I know what I'm saying is true when it makes me feel powerful. And the stronger I feel and the more I say about it and the more I believe it in my heart, it feels like good things just continue to happen. Not
Interesting.
because I think it's just like happenstance, but because I think the more I tell myself, the more it becomes real. And so,
Right.
yeah, to anybody out there that has that negative voice in your head, which I think we all do have, it's very real.
Yeah.
Just indulge yourself for a day. Like try to reframe that.
Predict differently.
Predict or try. The first step is trying, right?
The first step is trying. And what Lisa Feldman Barrett talks about is we predict with a couple of things. We predict from our memories and we predict from these emotional concepts. And that's where the choice can happen. So you can even think about like, what memories do I want to bring into this day? Bad ones, good ones. There's a choice there. I can bring in an emotional idea. I'm going to choose, for example, the emotion happy or gratitude. And it's like priming yourself.
You basically like preload with the good ammunition. Like,
Or I'm not sure it's ammunition, but preload with like good things, right? Right?
yeah.
But absolutely, right? I love that idea, preloading.
Yeah.
I think that I haven't thought
The
of it
better
that
word
way.
is priming. Like you're priming yourself
I
to
like
feel a certain
preload.
way. Yeah.
I like preload because what you're saying is this is empowering to me, right? I am not at the whim of life, but I can now preload what I want.
Yeah.
And I'm going to preload with, even if I got one good memory,
I'm going to load that
I'm
one
going to
up.
load that one up. If I got 4, I'm doing great. If I got 10, how can my life in that day not be different if I preload with those memories? Then it might be, I'm fortunate to be married to the incredible woman. I work with incredible children. I'm going to preload one of those memories. I'm going to preload something that happened to me. I'm also going to preload, she calls it a concept, an emotional concept. I'm going to preload happy. I'm going to put that word in my head, or gratitude, or instead of anxiety.
Right.
And now I'm preloaded into the day.
Wow. And it's so, I think the power of choice is important here because I can imagine a question I might get from my audience, which is, well, all my memories are bad. Let's just say all my memories are bad ones. I've had a really hard time.
Yeah, I
You
get
know,
it.
and if you only need to just pick one or two or three, you can find those ones in there.
I think
You can
so.
prime with good feelings. Everybody's experienced a good feeling, a good memory, right? I think you can draw on those to make your future a little bit brighter.
It's the smallest thing that can change, right? Your a good memory could be, I remember a cup of coffee I had
So true.
that was incredible, or I can remember the smell of roses in a store.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be, I remember when I won the Academy Award, right?
Yes.
It can be, I remember someone smiled at me on the street yesterday.
Well, you haven't won an Academy Award, but you have won awards for your films.
Yeah,
And
thank
I'd love to
you.
learn a little bit more about your career as a filmmaker, specifically with respect to one of your films. But I guess just to start, like, what made you want to start creating? You say you're a creative person. Have you always been this way?
That's a great question. So one of the things I believe is there's a powerful idea called like a calling,
Yeah,
and who knows what that means exactly. So the word, by definition, means something is calling you to do something, like your podcast,
I feel
right?
called.
You feel called, right? It's real, and it's so evident. I think you in life can have more than one calling. It is something that all of a sudden you feel like this feels right, right? And so I was fortunate. I knew a man named Zachariah Shar. Zachariah Shar is a Sudanese lost boy. For people who don't know what that means, in 1987, some time ago now, Sudan was in a civil war, and the kind of the northern part of Sudan was coming down and basically destroying villages. And Zachariah Shar was 5 years old when the soldiers came in and killed everyone. He climbed up in a tree. He spent the night there. And soldiers, kind of good soldiers, came the next day. He then went on a 1,000-mile journey to Kenya. They spent years in refugee camps. And then 4,000 of them came to the United States. They're called Lost Boys because effectively they lost their families. And Zachariah Shar was telling me that he wanted to go back to Sudan. Sudan had become a country in 2012, 2013, and to look for his parents.
Wow.
And it was sort of, the internet wasn't as robust as it is today. And so there still was a question like, are my parents alive? And so I felt, oh, that is the calling. You know, I, I need to help this person find out whether his parents were still alive. So, one thing led to the other. So I was able to put a film crew together. I was able to get funding to go. Um, and so we went to South Sudan to look for Zachariah Shar's parents. The film's called Lost Boy Home. And, but the whole experience taught me again, life, I mean, that was out of the blue. Like
What?
that's one of those things where I wasn't thinking that morning, let's
Completely.
go on this journey.
And out of nowhere,
It felt right.
right?
There it was. The story found me.
Exactly what we were talking about
The
before.
story found me. And maybe for whatever reason I was open and receptive to it. And so it began a 2-year incredible journey in my life.
Wow. And I just want to state how profound that is. Like to go look for to go look,
To go look,
to go
right?
search. Like I
Right.
don't know, but I want to know.
I want to know,
And
right?
so, are you at liberty to give the story here?
Yeah, it's very powerful. And so we went, we land in the middle of South Sudan, this very small village in a little prop plane, and I'm super anxious and like what's going to happen, and really out of my comfort zone.
I would be as well.
I was, and the plane left, and I was like, I hope that plane comes back.
You're like, oh my gosh, I'm really here.
I'm really here.
Yeah.
And so the whole village surrounded Zachariah, and you're kind of waiting for that moment, like, will the father and mother step forward? And it's kind of not happening, right? And then the whole village took Zachariah to this large thatched hut, which was like their church. And the whole village kind of surrounded Zachariah and started to sing. And you could tell, like, mom and dad aren't there. And then Zachariah turned to the camera and said, they just told me my mother and my father are no longer alive. But then some beautiful things happened. He found like a brother, he found a cousin, he found some family members. And at the end of the film, we take like a family portrait of, I think, maybe 15 people. And he had found his family. And uh, at the end of the film, he says, I'm not a lost boy anymore. And it just shows the power. We talked about being in the story. Well, not every story ends with this ending that we wanted, but the ending does provide something for us in our life. Like if he hadn't gone, he wouldn't have discovered this family he never had.
Completely.
Right? It's not like we're all promised this happy ending. That's not true. But what we're promised is if we enter into the story, we'll be changed. We'll be a different person at the end. And part of it is risking going into that story.
Completely.
Right? Zachariah could have been like, I'm too scared. I don't want to go. I don't want to know.
Well, and I'm sure he knew that there was a chance
Yeah.
that what he found out would come to pass.
Exactly. Right? But if he hadn't done that, and if we hadn't kind of pulled that together, I mean, probably one of the more beautiful moments in my life where he was able to say, I'm not a lost boy anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
And just because it's not the ending that he thought it was going to be and maybe you had all hoped for, I don't think that means that all was lost.
No, everything was found.
Right.
Right.
Everything
I mean,
was found.
he's not lost anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, he found a family.
I wish films like that were the mainstream. I wish those were the ones that came out in theaters, but clearly yours did well. And so I want to thank you for telling that story.
I appreciate
And I think it's an important message about, I think we all want our stories to end extravagantly with this great victory.
Right.
And I just don't think that's always the case.
No.
Right.
No. And that's the part where you're in the plot. You're in the story, right? And every story has challenges, and the ending, actually, in a strange way, that story is really powerful to people because it's real.
It's so real.
Right?
Like, that's life.
That is life. Life is not where mom and dad come running from the bush and embrace, and I mean, that's lovely. That's Hollywood.
Right. That's Hollywood.
That's Hollywood. And that's meaningful to us too. We love those films. But there's also truth there. Sometimes what we find is our family, but not our parents.
I'm curious, as you think back on your time with the Sudanese.
Yeah.
I think when I imagine those people, I imagine them living so differently from us and being so different. And maybe they're not, but I am curious, you spent time with them. Are there any lessons or things you take away that, you think we could maybe learn from here in our culture in the U.S.?
Well, it's we've heard this before, but the joy, the faith, the beauty of their life, they are the most beautiful, tall, well-dressed people I've ever known, right? And their resolve, their grit to persist, to survive is incredible. And when my iPhone doesn't work, I fall apart.
Me too. And I know you're going.
I don't have internet. Right. Like my life is unmoored. Right. I'm a ship lost at sea,
being blown wherever the wind will take you.
Right. Yeah. And if anything, the Sudanese show is they're in the story, but they're making the most of that story.
And I think for as simple as sometimes I think these people are, like, look at how profoundly they live.
Yeah. We share with them the human condition, right? We want to raise a family. We want to support our children. We want to make something meaningful out of our lives. So we hold that in common. We might live somewhere differently, but we hold the same.
Well, and I feel like, and that's like 99% of it. Like,
yeah.
There's a 1% difference. The real similarity that we all share is exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Like, we all have hopes and dreams, and we suffer. Right. We all go to sleep. We all wake up. Like that. I talked about this with Lynn, which is for as different as I think we all perceive each other to be, right? We're really actually not.
No.
At all.
Yeah.
we're actually extremely similar. And I feel like in a time right now that feels very divisive, it's important to remember that.
Exactly. Totally agree.
So I want to talk briefly, maybe as we start to close, about the next project you're embarking on.
Yeah.
I spoke with Lynn about this, and I'm
Yeah.
so curious to hear it from your side as well.
Yeah.
What's the Miracle Year project? And why are you so excited about it?
Yeah. Great question. Thanks for asking. So it goes actually strangely back to Albert Einstein. So Einstein, 1905, he's working as a patent clerk. And he writes 4 papers that really changed how we view the world, the universe. And it can be called his miracle year.
Yeah.
And we just found that really profound. And the idea behind it is uh, anyone can have a miracle year. And so we looked back in our own lives and we identified 5 that our family had had. We then did research into other people who've had miracle years. And basically, the idea is if you set aside time, if you are willing to enter the maze, for example, if you are willing to go on a journey, you can profoundly change your life. You can pivot. You can become the person you've always wanted to become. And so when we did the research, there's people, for example, who did fun things like moving to the Netherlands because people in the Netherlands are happy.
Yeah.
So they spent a year in the Netherlands and they learned. Another person might have been in debt and decided, I'm going to live on less. I'm going to do a year of less. I'm going to reshape my financial life. Other people went through grief and loss, and they're like, how am I going to get through this? I'm going to take a year and do that. I'm going to figure out how to move through my grief. I'm going to claim hope.
Well, I love that you said that, because a question I was going to have for you is, does a miracle year always have to be a happy one?
I don't know if it needs to be happy, but it again doesn't need to be Hollywood.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be like we're starting this project, then there's some people who want to start a new business, for example. Well, it doesn't mean at the end of the year I'm Steve Jobs and I founded Apple.
Well, that's why. Well,
Yeah.
that's why I asked.
Yeah.
Because I believe I'm living a miracle year right now.
Yeah,
But I'm not going to sit here and say that the process of this has been like so joyful and amazing. Like,
Yeah.
it's really hard, but it's
Right.
really important,
exactly right.
and it feels like the right thing.
Right. And so what our Miracle Year project does is we're coming alongside people like yourself or others who are like, I want to be who I really am. I want to discover something new about myself. I always had that dream, but I've never acted on it. My heart has always told me to try this, but my mind,
That's the biggest thing.
that's the biggest
Like,
thing.
I know in my heart there's this thing,
Yeah, exactly.
but I haven't done it, and now I need to do it.
And now I need to do it. So the Miracle Year project, we're coming alongside people. We have a course. We kind of coach people along with that. So we're there for people who want to set aside a period of time, and it's not a quick fix. It's not like it's a miracle hour and everything changes, but you're going to set aside time to say, this is the year where I'm going to really realize my dream, my next chapter, something big in my life.
And I love that you said it's not a miracle hour, because I think in the era of instant gratification that I think I and we maybe live in, I think, and I've heard this quote before, people underestimate what they can do in a year and they overestimate what they can do in a week.
That's perfect.
Right.
Exactly. Right.
And I think to be alongside a cohort, let's say, of people that are fighting so hard to block out that instant gratification and say, I'm going to take a dedicated amount of time
Yeah.
to strive for something,
Right.
is massively helpful.
I think so. And how often do we get a chance to do that? I mean, I'm just so impressed by you, Mike, because you have set aside this time to do this project, and your life will be forever different.
Yeah, and it's but it's also my mind and my heart too. I think that's that's one thing that to anybody interested in taking a miracle year, one thing that I will say as somebody who's living it and will hopefully be in a cohort of yours, formally, there is the achievement or the thing that you say you want to do, and maybe you do that. But I think even more important is the person you slowly start to become. The person I'm becoming is just as important, if not more important, than the podcast I'm creating.
That's so profound. And I totally agree. And part of it, I think what you're hinting at, which is what we're trying to create, is You can do it alone, but gosh, it's a little more fun,
Right.
and you find community. You find a friend, a colleague, a relationship, support. Like
Completely.
there are superhumans that can maybe like go out into the wilderness and come back this super changed human. Most of us aren't that person. Most of us need a team.
Well, that's the Hollywood of it too.
That's
It's
the
like, you
Hollywood,
just
right?
grit and bear it and put your head down and you pop out on the other side. People talk about a quote unquote like your winter arc,
Yeah,
where it's like it's dark and it's cold and it's quiet and it's
right.
just you and it's like you just suffer and then you know, that's nice, but I think it's also more realistic to be like, I need some people to lean on.
Absolutely.
And that's why, again, I say this, and to anybody listening, I would greatly encourage you. I think it's miracleyourproject.org.
Yeah.
Please visit the site because, you know, as a future member of this, like, I am desperate for people that I can sort of just
Yeah.
have in a web, in a community, even if I don't necessarily know them personally, just to know that like we're all kind of in this hard thing
Yeah.
that's going to last a little while together. And on the other side, there's good things. And in the story itself, there's good things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally agree. And recently I just read something where the person was saying, you know, like ask your 90-year-old self, what do you wish you'd done?
It's a scary thought to have because
Right?
I thought about that. Like, imagine I die and I say to myself, I wish I could have did this podcast.
Yeah.
Imagine that regret, like, you know,
But you don't, and that's the challenge, and it's scary, and it's horrible, and it's scary, and so exciting is, but then it goes back. You brought up this idea of trust,
yeah,
right? All right, I'm going to that 90-year-old self said, well, take this year and finally heal from that traumatic event. Take this year and figure out your next chapter. Take this year and start that business. Whatever it is, your 90-year-old self is cheering you on
yes,
because you're going to have a story and you're trusting. Well, you might not find your parents like Zachariah Shar in that film, but you're going to find a family.
yeah.
And that journey will forever change you. And don't deny yourself that adventure. Don't deny yourself that possibility. And I think that's the power of it.
And I think I love that you use the word adventure because, you know, again, this is a cliche and I try not to speak in them, but
Yeah,
it's not really about the destination. It's really about the adventure.
absolutely.
I think once you embark on these adventures in life that are really hard to start, but you say, I'm just going to put one foot in front of the other and get going, you can never go back to who you were before you left. It's almost like Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite movies
Oh,
ever,
absolutely.
right? You know, and Frodo takes the ring and he leaves the Shire. And then at the
Yeah.
end of the movie, they're like, do you want to come back? And he's like, I don't think I ever can.
That's so good, Mike.
But
right.
That's kind of how I feel. Like my old life, which looks the same as my current life. I do all
Yeah.
the same things. I eat all the
Right.
same foods and I'm with the same people, but I can never go back to the old way of living. I'm different now. I don't want to be there anymore.
First, thanks for sharing that. And I mean, that's so inspirational to your audience, right? And thanks for being vulnerable like that, because that is the invitation.
Did it?
You gave the invitation right there. And the invitation is like, um, y- you have to take the risk and trust to leave the Shire. Now you can stay in the Shire. Like it's nice in the Shire.
It's safe. It
It's
feels
safe.
good.
There's probably good food in the Shire. It's really
Totally.
nice and there's shelter.
Right.
But gosh, if you're willing to leave the Shire,
Who
what-
knows?
Who knows?
And that's the whole thing. It's like, that's why it's so scary. And I talked about this with Lynn. It's like,
Mm.
you don't know what's out there. And it could be really bad, but it could also be really good.
It's gonna be both.
It's going to be both. But I think there's beauty in that. That's the thing. And a lot of people don't do it because they're so scared of the bad.
Yeah. Well, you're alive.
Right. You know, and you rob yourself of all that could be.
And it goes back to what you brought up before. You're gonna trust you're gonna be okay. You're gonna trust it's gonna be okay. It doesn't mean you're not gonna have some really hard times. In one of my posts, I talk about I never know how to say his last name exactly. His first name's Naval Ravikant, I think.
Okay.
And he's
An author.
He's an author, a great entrepreneur, kind of one of those wise tech guys. And he talks about how our resume at the end of our life is our challenges. It even says it's our suffering.
Yeah, I've got the passage pulled up from your book.
Yeah.
Can I read it real quick? Because I think
Sure,
it's so
yeah.
profound. So this is chapter 23, your real resume. And it reads, your real resume is just a catalog of all your suffering, observes Naval Ravikant. We often think a worthy goal in life is to seek to make it easier and simpler. But Ravikant points out what we are likely remembering at the end of our life are the moments where we discovered the true essence of who we are. And these are more often than not found in our sacrifices and the hard things we've done. In other words, one kind of resume lists our jobs, awards, and accomplishments. And if we think about it, almost nobody cares about that, which is completely true. But we do lean in whenever a person tells us about a time they suffered, sacrificed, and what happened next. That's the story.
That's the story, right? And when I found that one day, I got goosebumps because that felt real to me. And at the end of my life, when I'm with my kids, grandkids, whoever, a dog, whatever, you want, what are they going to say? Well, tell me, Dad, Grandpa, about the time this.
Exactly.
And they're not going to say, tell me about the time you won an award for your film.
So true. And I guess...
They're going to say, tell me about the risk or the thing, or tell me when this went wrong.
And that's
right?
when it's exciting. Like, oh my gosh, he did this and he tried and he almost failed, or even if he did and he pivoted, like, that's the fun stuff.
Right, because you're passing it on at that point.
Yeah.
You're passing on what Novel, I think, is saying there is you're inspiring the next people to follow. Right. As you're more vulnerable sharing this, as you did today, like this is hard, your podcast. Well, you're sharing your resume.
Yeah.
And you're probably inspiring someone out there to be like, well, I can try it. If Mike can try it, I can try it.
I hope so. As we close, I would just like to ask you, and I asked the same thing of Lynn, but you've done so much and you're such a profound individual. I just really want to thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
First of all,
Yeah.
this is like Christmas for me. This is unbelievable. So thank you, first of all.
Yeah.
But as you reflect back on your life and your life experiences, a lot of my viewers are in their late teens and 20s.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them are on the cusp of their miracle year, let's say.
Yeah.
A lot of them are trying to engage more deeply with the world. Are there any pieces of advice or things you would say for people that are, call it my age and maybe looking to make a small change?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's what we've talked about. I think trust in yourself.
Yeah.
Trust to go first. Trust to put yourself in the story where you don't know how it's going to end. Life is mystical, like Albert Einstein said. Open yourself to wonder. Be wrapped in awe, as he put it. Because when you do that, you're going to feel alive.
Yeah.
And when you feel alive, you are living the life you're supposed to live. So when you're in your 20s, that's the time to trust and to take that leap of faith.
And I like the word, we keep saying it, but trust, because that gives you hope.
Yeah.
And you need it. You can't you can't persist without hope.
Right.
And if you believe truly in your heart that good things are on the other side, or that this is part of a story that's going to define who you are one day,
Yeah.
to me, that's enough to keep going.
Absolutely.
And it's at the end of the day, it's about winning the war, maybe not the battle. Like, you just got to keep trusting in the story,
Right.
the life.
Right. Because life is this incredible gift.
Yeah.
And the more alive we feel inside of it, the more life has purpose and meaning, and, go for it.
Well, I
Go
love that.
first.
Go first. Well, thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Thank you, Mike.
I think if you'd be willing, and I've already been getting emails about Lynn. We'd love to do maybe a round two someday.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. I appreciate it.